I'm so excited to introduce Liz Berry. She's the co-founder of Public Lab and has been doing amazing work with archiving and storing the data, environmental and governmental data that needs to be saved in the recent acts of the administration. They've been doing a lot of amazing work in Taiwan as well in terms of participatory democracy and having that empowering the people and really taking ownership, having ownership in the process. So I will let her talk more about it. I'm really excited, and please welcome Liz Berry.
Oh, thank you. Hi, folks. It's really great to be here tonight. Thank you so much for having me. I'm from a number of different open communities, all of which are very excited to connect to ProgCode. We've been following ProgCode's work. We just think that you are setting the standard for welcoming people into progressive open source communities, and it's a real treat to be here, and thank you for inviting me. So I'm here to share some latest updates from the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. And I'm a member there, and I've been an event organizer. And I'm also on staff at the Public Laboratory for Open Technology and Science, which, as a nonprofit, we've become the fiscal sponsor of this initiative, which rose up in response to the recent election results. The worry was that climate data would be deleted in the very short term. And in the long term, we're worried about the loss of institutional memory, the gutting of the EPA, the changing role of the United States in global climate governance, all those things. But there was an initial reaction that involved thousands of people to archive EPA government data before and during the administration change. And so many different people were doing it. We have Nigma.io here in the room. We have the DAT project, Azimuth, Climate Mirror, as well as the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. And having so many people working to back up at-risk government data is really a feature, not a bug. And we had our own several hundred people working here in New York on February 4th. Thank you to NYU's Interactive Telecommunication Program, always a supporter of activist hacking. It was quite a busy time in January and February as dozens of people were joining the Slack every day. We were trying to figure out onboarding. We learned about ProgCode, and we tried to learn from you guys very, very fast. And the initiative itself was forming. And so out of all those people backing up government data, the group I started working with was the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. They are running on consensus. There are over 20 institutions. A few months ago, it was maybe 60 members. Now it's over 100. And they are governing. They break out into committees to do various management tasks. And there's a steering committee that works on consensus. And I respect this so much. And they've been able, this is it's probably too small for your phones to pick up, but that goes to the recent 100 Days report that they've just put out, which speaks to some of the longer term issues about in what ways environmental governance is at risk in the US and what precedents is it based on. The recent Harper administration in Canada, which had an actual Fahrenheit 451 moment. Do we have any Canadians in here? Sort of Canadians. Yeah, there was a library full of ocean research from a century and a half ago, undigitized. And the Harper administration, which was already attacking science and attacking regulatory scientists, also went after the data. They pulled up, a dumpster was pulled up in front of the library, the books were loaded in and driven to an incinerator. Actual Fahrenheit 451. That's our most recent precedent that we are worried about. So you should definitely read their 100 Days report and get a sense for the scope of this initiative, which includes the data archiving, which I'm mostly here to talk about, as well as web monitoring, submitting Freedom of Information Act requests, and then the ethnographic studies for people retiring or forced out of the EPA to preserve this very fragile institutional memory, which disappears quietly and irretrievably otherwise. just a bit looking in at what the website monitoring team is doing. They're using some services as well as setting up some of their own to track changes in language. Now, websites go up and come down with every administration, but it's really the messaging about climate change, which this team is tracking in detail and submitting in partnership with journalists. The Intercept, as well as many other articles have been placed in the New York Times and the Post. So this is an important partnership model between data scientists and hackers and investigative journalists, which I think is very great. But back to saving the data, because so many people were getting involved in this moment, people who hadn't been activists before, people who said, you know, I never really engaged, but then they came for the data, which is actually a phrase I heard multiple times hosting these in-person events. The first event was held up in Toronto. Again, thank you Canadians for immediately recognizing world events for their possible consequences and starting guerrilla archiving, not even of the US data, but not even inside the United States. And then events came down to Philly, Boston, New York, Ann Arbor, Austin, San Francisco, Portland, really, and many places in between. And in the early days, we were just figuring out how to possibly keep so many hands busy at an in-person hacking event. There were not yet ways to like remotely contribute to this effort. We were just getting together, and we made a track. So there's a lot of tracks here. And it's something I'm interested in discussing with this community because you do so much participation design. So I just wanted to briefly go through it, what's now a deprecated process. But first, writing up primers to different federal agencies so that people understood like what data was where and the significance, like which policies were based on what, and really like kind of setting the extent. And then another group was using a Chrome extension by the Internet Archive and also another Chrome extension that got written to seed various end-of-term archives. So no programming. So in the first case, you needed some domain expertise. That would be helpful, or else just high reading comprehension skills to like quickly familiarize yourself with what was going on at various city agencies. In this, you simply needed internet literacy, web browsing literacy. And then when you get to actually harvesting the data, this broke out into tracks that were called researching, harvesting, checking and bagging, and describing, which relates to there are actual scientists present at the events sitting next to the people who were downloading the data. And that was the research phase to kind of better describe and set targets for like how to get stuff out of map interfaces, like what really mattered. And then bundling it all and sending it up to Amazon, as well as the CCAN instance. And then in the very end, we were writing metadata. Where we are today, the metadata step is the most important. Let's keep that in mind. So you can just imagine that was a lot of hectic activities, accurate records of how data was downloaded, like what the actual scripts were not recorded. There was a lot of duplication. But if it had really gone down, there would have been copies. It would have been hard to authenticate, but there would have been copies. But very quickly, people started simplifying this participation design. What we did in New York, we were just like, all right, either you're like submitting stuff to the Internet Archive, or you're archiving data, or you're doing social media or interviewing, or you're in like a group of developers planning out next steps and tools to facilitate the next steps. Which gets, and now we have to kind of jump forward to today. Data Together is the name of a partnership formed between this consensus-driven initiative, the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, plus Query, a small team who's been writing most of the web apps to help people coordinate their efforts, and Protocol Labs, who maybe you've heard of the Interplanetary File System. I definitely hadn't. The point of this is that we need to move towards distributed data storage, so we can track all the origins, have many, many people writing metadata, and like have a hash that shows the uniqueness of all the data. So we can clearly know if this thing that you downloaded here that's stored here is the same as this thing that you downloaded here and is stored here. So many lessons came out of this that if, like broadly with this initiative, in terms of the public participation focus of this initiative, they're very concerned with data literacy and connections to data justice with a kind of use it or lose it mentality, like does the public care about this data? And why would they care? What is it important to? What environmental justice issues? What federal funding issues? What human health impacts? And so we're anticipating, currently, this is the way to participate. If you're a remote person not located near anyone else, there will be no further need to see the Internet Archive's end of term archive. It's complete. But there is need to write metadata for the ongoing data archiving activities. So this is good for anyone who either has a specific domain expertise or who can describe data. And then in person, we're no longer promoting giant events with hundreds of people to show up at once with so many hands to keep busy. We're interested in local working groups and in many cases connecting to existing communities that already have regular meeting schedules. We'd like to be connected to Prog Code. We are connected to Civic Hall. And the main working groups, the main projects are the web page monitoring. There's many volunteer analysts at this point reading over all those diffs between what the web pages were and what they've been changed to, and getting that information out to the newspapers. There's the Data Together project itself, which is open source. And then there's Google Summer of Code mentorship happening with folks working on user interface and visualization. And my last two slides were mostly just to get you guys oriented to like the best place to start. There's a really long GitHub repo called edgy-govdata-archiving. If you could just take a picture of the QR code, that would be great. And then we're experimenting with a simple Trello board for really directing people who have just maybe heard something over Twitter about it and are starting from zero. They've never met anybody and they just want to get started. And this is where, we'd really like to brainstorm with the folks in this room, to share some knowledge and learn how to make it better. And this is my last slide about this, but I do have a special bonus section, although I'd like to take questions about anything I just said before totally switching topics.
So anyone has any questions to do this? Here.
Are you getting any help from Hanson and Sachs at Columbia?
I personally don't know, but it would be, I can either ferry your question into the Slack, or maybe you could get in the Slack and then ask.
Most famous.
Joe.
Just really quickly, maybe this is something we do afterwards rather than like right now. Is there a way we can share those slides, or we can all have access to them? We can easily get to our code.
Great, yeah. Whatever your standard method is, or else I can put it up in my standard place. Okay. Yeah.
What I could do, Joe, is I have the links if you're in our Slack. I'll post them in there so everybody can see your links and stuff. Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Any questions? Any more questions? No.
Okay, great. So I have some long-term interests in the environmental data space because for 7 years I've been part of an open community working with people to create their own data, because often the government environmental data isn't detailed enough to actually capture human health impacts. But this moment was urgent enough that all of us who would normally be complaining about the EPA, saying, why the year averages? Why not hotspot sensing? We threw in to protect, in support of the EPA, because that was the urgency of the moment. And because all the people getting onboarded, there's existing nonprofits and open communities like the one I have also ready to take in a bunch of new activists who care about environment and technology. I also have a number of other long-term interests, and one is some of the progress being made in smaller democracies. My examples are from Taiwan's Occupy movement in March and April 2014, 23-day occupation of their parliament building, the Legislative Yuan. And it was very interesting about this Occupy in particular and what it has led to that I want to invite people to brainstorm on locally, is that by the end of the Occupy, all the different camps, like the unions or the environmentalists, people concerned about healthcare and equitability, by the end of the Occupy, they had actually found more points of consensus by a very careful, deliberate demonstration in the street by the civic tech community there, gov0.tw, kind of our equivalent to maybe our group here, if the prod code locally / beta NYC perhaps. If we of those communities had actually stopped arguing for our own actual agenda points and dedicated ourselves to facilitating democratic process to help a stuck society find points of agreement to move forward on. And they actually did it. They did it in the street with Post-its and chart paper and handing out markers to everyone and explaining how to run in-person meetings, and they live streamed and broadcast the whole thing to the nation. And the government listened. And they said, okay, let's incorporate some of this work. And a primary Gov0 activist, Audrey Tang, has become digital minister. She moved into the government, and she's overseeing this process. There's some really great technology at use here. Polis, a sophisticated, well, a very simple interface for saying agree, disagree, or pass on statements that anyone can enter, like an agenda-free survey that's created as it goes. It's very, very fancy in terms of how it shows opinion clusters. But it's the in-person facilitation that I'm very interested in. There's a group of New Yorkers starting to build up our facilitation skills with the idea to be the in-person support around some of this very interesting civic technology. And to start testing out here in New York at any opportunity. Obviously, we're not part of the government yet, but neither were they when they started. So the point of connections here are, if you want to, definitely TLDR on that QR code. It's a 5,000-word article I wrote last August about all this. But if you wanted to join the Gov0 Slack, there's the general channel, the English version, where there's already about a dozen New Yorkers in there talking with some of the most active Gov0 folks. And we're trading a lot of knowledge very fast. And I'd be happy to have some of you connect to that. Any questions on that?
Any questions to Liz about the whole presentation, anyone?
Matt?
When you talk about facilitation and all that, is the Slack channel the best place to just kind of stay up to date on how that's going down?
Yeah, that's the single place that the group conversation is happening right now. Although as we kind of figure out more what we want to do, probably we'll create a New York channel, probably inside of Beta NYC.
Can that 5,000-word article be found somewhere else?
It's actually it's the civic space, right?
Yeah, it's the one linked on my bio.
Yeah, it's in the Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.